My name is Errol Anthony Henderson. Um, I think technically an associate professor emeritus at Penn State University. But I've technically retired from Penn State University, but I haven't retired from political science. So I'm looking for my next job. See, that's what makes it difficult to answer but that's my technical affiliation.
Well, now, can you tell us a bit about your personal background? So, specifically where you're from, or what was your home or family life like for you growing up?
Okay. I was born and raised in the Brewster Projects on the near east side of Detroit. I was actually born in the house of the project. So that's where I'm from. Coming up, we were poor. We weren't working class. We were poor. Poor is below poor. The po is your po, so you don't even have the extra O and R in poor. It's like that. But my parents instilled in us. It motivated us to learn. I'm the youngest of my mother's ninth. I'm her ninth child. I think I'm my father's third. I think. And growing up, there's a lot of different dimensions to it. It was fun. It's like sometimes we were having so much fun we didn't realize we were poor. But then you see a lot of violence from the house and then in the projects and stuff. But it was so much so that I joined the army when I was 17. And it's funny because my mother encouraged me to join the military. She'd rather have me in the military than in the streets of Detroit. That's kind of but my parents died within a year and a half. I got out of the army in 1980. And my father was already dead. And in January, my mother died. But I was never ignorant. I was just often just uninterested. So I was kind of I went to a high school in Detroit that you have to be accepted to. It's a public school. So, but then I had to go to night school to graduate from that high school because got in a little trouble there. So that was another reason why I motivated to go to the military. But I say that to make the point. So my mother died in January of 83. So, and I was still in the project. So I was walking to Wayne State University that I've been exposed to because we used to go to the library, places like that. So I went there and I had a 4.0 just on anger alone. I was just so mad that my mother died. So anyway, I was at Wayne State from 83 to 86. I was just going back into the Army. That was my thing. I was going to be an officer, go back in the Army because that's what I knew. I was never trying to be, sometimes they say you're poor, you want to be rich. They don't want to be rich, just they don't want to be poor. So work minimum wage jobs since I was like 14 and stuff, things like that. So I was going to the Army because that's what I knew, but to go as an officer. And then I had this professor, his name was Maurice Waters, that really struck me. I did really well at Wayne State. I was on the dean's list. I graduated Phi Beta Kappa. And so people were asking me, was I going to graduate school? I didn't know what that was. So I thought they were asking me, was I going to graduate from school? So I'm like, yeah, I didn't know. Then Maurice Waters in political science, he put me in for this Dorothy Danforth Compton fellowship to go to the University of Michigan. And when he told me that, it just blew me away. I didn't know what a fellowship was, but to do it, I had to go to Michigan. Now I had a regular Army commission. I was going into the regular Army, not in the reserve. So I had to change that to go to Michigan because I'm like, wow, this is blowing me away. And I asked him, I said, Professor Waters, I said, I don't understand because I didn't think it was real at first. They're gonna pay me to go to school and to go to me. So I asked him, he explained it to me. I said, I don't understand. Why would you do this for me? I said, most of the time, he's a political scientist. Most of the time in class, we would argue. We'd be arguing. And he said something I'll never forget. He said, Errol, I quickly realized that the main reason you and I argued so much in our class is that you and I were the only ones who did the reading in the class. Blew me away. And it's just to jump ahead, a decade and a half later, he would be my colleague as I'm a professor at Wayne State. But I went to the University of Michigan, worked with David Singer, Ali Mazrui, Ken Organsky. These were professors that were important. I'd have to add a social work professor named Rosemary Sari as well. But these were important. I didn't have mentors per se. I never liked that word. But David Singer put me on the Correlates War Project as soon as I got to Michigan, I think in '86. Ali Mazrui, who was a renowned IR scholar and Africanist from Kenya. He did the BBC series, The Africans. Did it so well that the BBC tried to stop it from being disseminated because it was so from an African perspective. It's Ali Mazrui. And so that's where I worked with. I worked on the Correlates War Projects, did a lot of quantitative analysis in world politics. When I got there was only two of us, two black folks in the coming class. And I saw a sister across we had this, what do you call it? Like an icebreaker for all the new students. You know, black folks, we go to some place and it's predominantly white, so we're looking for each other. And I saw her across the room. And so I think we went to each other because she's looking too. I said, I'm just thinking to myself. I said, oh, you must be my obligatory second. And she said, no, you're mine. And I said, that was so cool. And I said, we've been cool ever since. Her name is Kathy Cohen. So Kathy Cohen and I came in together. And so then at Michigan, like at Wayne State, there'd been another question you asked about activism, because this was always a part of what I did. But just in the matriculation part, so I got a University of Michigan degree. And then I stopped there because I know I'm going on.
No, that was great. Now, just for the sake of clarifying the timeline, so you entered the military 20 years and then came back and did your undergrad at Wayne State?
Oh, no. I went into the military when I was 17. Mm-hmm. Came out when I was 19. And that was that year and a half when my father died when I was in. My mother died as soon as I got out.
And at Wayne State, that you took political science courses, expecting to go enter as an officer into the military, but instead you went to graduate school at Michigan.
Yes, I went to Wayne State from '83 to '86 because I'm just going through, and I wanted to major in political science and computer science. But the advisor told me, he said, you know, if you take 20 credits this semester, you can graduate this semester. Blew me away. I didn't know. And because all I knew that was secure, that seemed to be something for a career, was the military. But I was going to go back as a JAG. So I wanted the military to pay for my law school. But I wanted to get all this military training. So I was going to be an armed infantry officer. And I ended up becoming a tank officer because I wanted to learn. But I had very little intention. There's a famous Bob Marley song. My father's from St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica. But my oldest brother, recently deceased, was a Vietnam veteran. He used to bring us the reggae music. So when I was going to that high school, I used to listen to Rastaman Vibration. There was another Bob Marley album called Uprising. And it has a line. It says, don't you let the system make you kill your brother, man. So I've never fired a shot in anger through the military. Coming up in Detroit, you had to do what you do in the project. But the idea of going back was to go back as a JAG, because not only I didn't want to be poor, and I didn't want to get married or anything and bring a woman into poverty. So that was a big thing for me. I don't want to be poor. It kept me out of trouble too. A lot of my friends were people called drug dealers, gang members, and a lot of them, by the time I was high school, a lot of my friends were dead. They were in prison or headed there. And, so that was another reason to go there. So it's an irony of growing up poor like that you go to the military to get away from them. And there's something. So the timeline, so by '86, I'm in Michigan. And by '87, we started a movement there, Black Action Movement 3. It's a big protest, but we can talk about that if you're interested. So that was constantly a part of my scholarship, was activism. That was constant.
So to that, how would you characterize the political social environment in the U.S. while you were in college or graduate school? And or were you involved in social political activism as a student? Oh,
it was the Reagan era. So it was like the Cold War. And Reagan was lighting the fire under that, you know? So, so white supremacists, and the popularization of white supremacists, like Gil Scott Heron, Ronald Reagan, the man who called for a bloodbath on our college campuses, you know? So this is the Reagan era. It's the era of AIDS, the era of hip hop. And I concentrate on some of these. It's also the time, 83, when Harold Washington wins the mayoralty of Chicago, and the Jesse Jackson phenomenon pushed the Democratic Party to its left in 84 and 88. So I raised those specific things to make the point there was opposition, constant opposition to Reagan. People knew who he was, from the invasion of Grenada to the debacle of the Marines killing in Lebanon, and his policies, his militaristic policies. And of course, his background as governor of California. But there was resistance. One of the big areas of resistance was the Free South Africa. There was resistance, the Jesse Jackson phenomenon, raising issues in the Democratic Party that are now prominent, but Jesse Jackson often doesn't get credit for. He was doing that in 84 and 88. And a lot of youth was moving toward that. It was hip hop. And hip hop also had resistance from the message of Grandmaster Flash, but all the way to, it was an excellent sort of We Are the World hip hop collaborative called Sun City. And the refrain was, I ain't gonna play Sun City. Sun City is a resort in apartheid South Africa, in Bophuthatswana, where some people were coming and they would play that. So all these artists got together. You got from the rappers, they went and got Eddie Kendricks and David Ruffin from the Temptations. What's his name from with Springsteen's band that played in The Sopranos? Lil Stevie, always wear the bandana. He's in it. The range of people who are in that video, and they keep saying the refrain, I ain't gonna play Sun City. It was just a jam. And there was a movement on college campuses throughout the country, so much so there was a frontline special called Racism 101. And we at the University of Michigan formed the United Coalition Against Racism. One of the first things I said, I used to speak a lot there. One of the first thing I said on the main, I don't know what you would call it, but the main meeting spot outdoors at Michigan is called the Dyad. And there was about 2,000 or 3,000 folks in the Dyad. And I got up to speak, I said, you know, they didn't even have Martin Luther King Day. They called it Diversity Day. This is how backwards it was then. And the first thing I said was, I ripped off from Gil Scott Heron. I said, the first thing I want to say is, Diversity Day, my ass. This is Martin Luther King's birthday, and they just went wild, you know. So but it was a resistance because the cats was playing racist jokes on the racist jokes. Okay, I want to put that in air quotes on the university radio. They have threatened. They put this thing under a meeting of sisters, the AKAs in the dorm, said this verbatim, it's open season on. That's what they were doing. This is how scandalous they were at university. So we had organized, the first organized university. The United Coalition Against Racism. The steering committee consisted of me, Barbara Ransby, Tom Levis, what's Big Brother? Came from Howard, who's now at Michigan, Rob Sellers. And I want to point out some of these folks in the leadership of the steering committee, Regina Jemison, because they went on, and I'm missing some folks, they went on to become prominent in their fields. Barbara Ransby in history, Tom Levis in sociology, Big Rob Sellers in psychology. But we're protesting too. And then a second group emerged called the Better Grounded in Black. This was a multi-racial coalition we put together, but the leadership was all Black. That was the steering committee, some people just named. But there was the Black Action Movement 3, that brothers Chuck Winder and J.D. Simpson and sister, I'm blocking on her name. She married Barry Sanders. But they were in the law school and they were more tied closely to the frats and sororities. And they called it BAM 3. So we put it together and it was United Coalition Against Racism BAM 3. We call it BAM 3 for shorthand. And I say that because a lot of BAM is used quite a bit from the Black Action Movement all the way to and some other folks. But this was BAM 3 because it was the third one at Michigan. Long story short, we protested, we shut down buildings. It's like what people saw in the 60s in forum, but we had advanced to realize that we had to build institutions. The institutions would outlast us, and institutions they would be compelled to recognize. One of them was called the Office of Minority Affairs, and to put the director over there, his name was Charles Moody. They brought Jesse Jackson in to mediate our demands with the university. It was Harold Shapiro. Now, when they got to the point of negotiation, Harold Shapiro, the president, he would leave and go to Princeton. But when he was president, asked about negotiating. And I used to use my middle name, Anthony. And he told him, he said, I'll negotiate with anyone except Anthony. So I took that as a badge of honor. You know what I'm saying? Because we came there, and Michigan didn't have, there's a class structure in Michigan too, among black folks. And they hadn't had folks from the projects, this was us coming up, but making demands on the university to fulfill its early obligation. You figure, you got to have BAM 3? This is the third time? Because they keep reneging, you see? And then a lot of those people, I would go back, when I was in Michigan, I still lived in Detroit. I didn't want to live in Ann Arbor. I'm not knocking folks who do. So I drove 47 miles to commute. But I would bring brothers and sisters from Wayne State. I still live 2 blocks from Wayne State. When I left the projects, I moved to streetcar Hancock. Anyway, which is a block from Wayne State. But still on the east side of Woodward. Gotta be on the east side of Woodward. But I would bring brothers and sisters from Wayne State, and those brothers and sisters would then organize in 1989 even better takeover. Because I used to tell them, I said, y'all gonna do more than us because you're right in the middle of Detroit. And they did. 11 days, we occupied the building, the administration building. We held that building for 11 days. And we created a degree and tenure granting Africana Studies department that's still there today. Because we learned, I want to be conscious of time, but at Howard and all over the country, they were having similar protests. And Brother Joshua Myers just wrote a book on the protest at Howard. And the brother says, I don't know these folks. They mentioned some of us at Wayne State in '89, myself, Shireen Shaban, who are among the leadership there. But that also include Brother Daryl Darcy, Lee Smith, Mikhail Ansari. These are Wayne State students. But I was in the University of Michigan's Black Student Union, and I was representing the Black Student Union as well in Wayne State studying. After we did that, Michigan State protested. See, we had some of the folks from Michigan. And that's part of the movement. And I'll end with this. There's so little writing of the historians not writing on the 80s yet. The 80s is so important. It's not, we built on what the folks did in the 60s in much respect. And a lot of them advised us as well. And I'll tell you one in particular. But what was important for us is to recognize the particular demands for institution building, because we saw how they played the folks in the 60s. Yeah, we're going to give you this, and we'll give you a center, and you realize the center can't grant degrees, or the center, you have to have a co-major, and it can't grant tenure, so it doesn't get professors, doesn't get the funding. So we learned those lessons, and a lot of this from those same activists. But we want to get more of a focus on the 80s. It was also a time of the urban peace and justice movement. I mentioned the gang, and I was part of the National Gang Truce movement. The first meeting in Kansas City was to bring together some 200 different sets from 22 cities across the United States to try to organize a truce. The truce initiative started before the LA revolt. But it was definitely fueled by that. And it brought together a lot of folks, like former Panthers, like Marion Stamps in Chicago. One of the representatives from Minnesota was Keith Elliston, he actually went to Wayne State. He was there when I was there, but he went to law school in Minnesota. But he was part of it. We got funding from sort of disparate groups. Well, at one time in Minneapolis, and I'll stop with this, when the funding was taken away by some groups, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis came and dropped 14 grand on it. Because that's when they came up. They said, this has got to work. This has got to take place. And when we would go to the cities, we stayed at least 4 or 5 days. We bring together people who, sometimes we have people who are trying to literally kill each other. And we had shot callers and others from the different set for real conflict resolution. We would go to the high schools, we go to the prison, we go to the correctional facilities as well. So 4 or 5 days, so in different cities. Started in Kansas City, went to Chicago, went to Minneapolis, LA, San Antonio. This was the urban peace and justice movement. But a big part of that were the women, mothers of children who've been killed, like Clementine Barfield in Detroit in '87, when she started Save Our Sons and Daughters. And she branched out. This after her teenage son, Derek, was killed outside of high school in Detroit, right? So she started building in the bloodshed of her own child, Save Our Sons and Daughters. I volunteered with them for 7 years. And I promised her once I got my PhD, I would come and work for her for at least a year before I go into academia, which I did when I came out in 93. But I wanted to say about Miss Barfield, Save Our Sons and Daughters. She then hooked up with Brenda Muhammad in Atlanta, whose son had been murdered. Sister Muhammad started Mothers of Murdered Sons. When she met Miss Barfield, she made Mothers of Murdered Sons and Daughters. And then Barbara Meredith was out in LA, out here, and they had started Mothers Rock, Mothers Reclaiming Our Children. You see what I'm saying? So this was the urban peace and justice movement. This was so I was involved in that as well. Matter of fact, in my graduation, I think, what was that, 92, I graduated from Michigan. No, 93. I didn't go to it. You see, I have to think. I didn't go to it. I was at the Gang Summit in Kansas City. So train that there's a tradition, there's a black tradition, a black intellectual tradition that doesn't separate activism from academic work. But I make it real clear. In my classes, I teach accuracy. I don't teach advocacy. I don't say these students have to go out and be involved. No. You're a self-determined person. You make your own decisions. You don't have to parrot what I'm saying. International relations, I'm going to introduce you to mainstream international relations. And I'm going to introduce you to some other things that should be in the mainstream, and you'll understand why. You see what I'm saying? So, but it's not because I don't have a special name for it. I don't need to call it critical this, critical this. It's just accurate. And I'm real big on empirical approaches. What I learned at Michigan doing quantitative work, but the person who introduced me to quantitative work was a brother named Kenneth Hill, who came in, he used to come in just clean, just so clean. I found out later he was also a preacher, but he was so clean. He's an AME preacher. He showed me as a guest lecturer at Wayne State, quantitative work in political. I'd never seen nothing like this before. And then Professor Waters invited David Singer to lecture at Wayne State. And that's when I saw him as an undergrad doing this quantitative work and seeing that that's part of our tradition too. The first I'll stop with this. The first quantitative study done in sociology in the United States, not the first one done by a black person, but the first one done, Philadelphia Negro, W.E. Du Bois in 1899. And one could argue that though it's called investigative journalism, and it is, but the systematic work in 1892 and 1895 Ida B. Wells Barnett should qualify as sociology as well. Okay, I'll stop.
Well, thank you for that. Now, you've been touching on your work quite a bit. Can you tell us about your research trajectory? So what was your dissertation topic? What is your current main area of focus? And are there any particular scholars whose work was influential in your thinking and research?
Oh my goodness, yes. And wow. My dissertation topic was Afrocentrism and World Politics Towards a New Paradigm, which became my first book in 95. My committee was, David Singer chaired my committee. It was so interesting. David Singer said, he said, I don't know anything about Afrocentrism, but I can follow a logical argument. See? And I like that. Harold Cruz was. A lot of the few black professors at Michigan, a lot of them didn't want to deal with me because as a student, I was really big on student leadership. I'm deferential to folks in fighting for liberation, but they ain't all young. And some of them would come and they would try to impose themselves. You got the wrong, it ain't that kind of party. You see what I'm saying? So I was assertive in that regard. So some of them didn't want them. I won't mention their names, okay? I'm talking about in the political science department and sociology and stuff. Matter of fact, several of them, some of them prominent, did come to us to get us to stop our protest. I won't say no name. Ernie Wilson, okay? He stands out. And the one professor, political psychologist professor, a black psychologist, very prominent. His obituary was in the New York Times. He tried to take my fellow. He took my fellowship. You see? So I went to Singer. I said, I told him what had happened. And he said, what can I do? He said, I can't do anything. He's no longer the chair of the department. I'm going to get to your question. Chair of the department. I said, but you a white man. I said, you just called. And he was like, really? He's like, and then he had this chuckle about him. He said, okay. So he called, and he said, and David Singer called him, and Professor Singer hung up the phone. He said, Henderson, you got your fellowship back. That was it. He had no authority. He's a white man, he's a senior white man. So I won't say the professor he called, because he went on to be very prominent, and James Jackson, okay? So he took my fellowship. So some of us, but you know who would work for me? A professor who had just got there. He don't even know how he's going to work out there. He just came from Savannah State University. I went up to him And he said, I can't tell you what he said because sometimes when he's informal, he'll curse a lot. So I can't say. And I told him the deal and how people want to be like, yeah. He put an expletive before that. Yeah, I work with you. No problem. Bring that. So his name was Haynes Walter. And Professor Walter was just with me the whole time. So these people, so the influence goes different. There's a white professor named Gail Ness. And also on my committee was Harold Cruz. Harold Cruz, somebody who supported our initiative, the Black Action Movement 3. And there were others too, but I could count them on one hand, okay, the black ones. But I want to be clear, overwhelmingly, our opposition came from white professors, white men and women. I want to be clear about that, okay? So the research of the Coalition War Project impressed me. I was looking for a theory of Afrocentrism that I could test empirically. And as I did, sister, I read so much and I said, there was nothing worthy of being called a theory. So I set out to make my own and to devise one. And I did in that book. I don't think I did a good job. I did an acceptable job. But it focused on the role of diasporas in world politics, major racial diasporas. The white one that became dominant through the European diaspora in the United States, and especially the black one, which was most oppressed, coming from Africa. So that's what I did. I looked at a diasporization. That's what I did. But it focused on Pan-Africanism. And I have to tell you, I know I'm jumping around. The first political science made me say, I want to be a political scientist. Because I didn't even realize my undergrad was a major in poli-sci, because I just took the class that interests me, you know. But then I saw this guy on the Jesse Jackson campaign. Brother was so cool. He was so thorough. A handsome guy too. He had party. And he was just so eloquent and so focused and so attentive to evidence. His name is Ronald Walters. And I looked at him on the PBS shows, that's impressive, a political scientist. I'm like, yeah, that guy. So, and he would become a colleague later. But I wanted to do quantitative work and I wanted to test things. One of the things I wanted to test, one of my earliest articles published, it was published in the journal Politics on military spending and poverty. In my own experience, I realized that we were poor, welfare, ADC. They called ADC before AFDC, Aid to Dependent Children. And I knew when I went to the Army, so half my check went to my mother, because that was the most you couldn't send it off, you know. Because some people I found out, you know, that they'd be usurious on their own children, or they would take all their money and stuff. And also in the Army, not the first time, but when I really had an intimate connection with poor white people, because I didn't think there were poor white people. Just like when I was in high school, I didn't think there were well-off black people. I was upset when I met the black people in high school and I saw they lived in houses and the houses were separated. They weren't connected, like the row house and the project. I was upset. I was pissed. I was a sister. I was a kind of girlfriend. I'm trying. And she lived in this elite part of Detroit called Palmer Wood. And they got intercoms in their house. Intercoms in their house. They got furniture that's made by, I have to be careful what I say. But sometimes we were extra proprietary and we might take things without paying for them at the cash register. So these belts, which were easy to take, you just put them on. Pierre Cardin, Yves Saint Laurent, we had those type of, but she got Pierre Cardin furniture. I hadn't seen nothing like that. I was pissed that she's black. So I met her in high school. But then I got a girlfriend from like the after Palmer Woods in Sherwood Ford. And I got a girlfriend from over there on the Northwest Side. So I would like to say my politics was such that I was like, no, I won't date you because you all left us in the project. So I had a girlfriend from over there. I got over it. I'm like, I guess we probably brought this on ourselves. so the idea about, I tell that story to make the point that my political consciousness was, even as I was working and doing these things, I was learning as I went along. I wasn't conscious in Wayne State. Some of the things I said back in '83, so I don't want to give people that impression. No, it wasn't. I had people in my family who were in the Black Panther Party. My older sister was in the Black Panther Party. They taught me, but it wasn't kicking in. I don't want to give people the impression. So when I see this quantitative work, military spending and power, I knew that the money I sent back to my mother was more than what she got on, especially because now I'm gone. Because aid to the families with dependent children, I was still a dependent child. You see what I'm saying? When I was 17. So I knew that military spending typically crowds out investment, and it was viewed as something that could have either no impact on poverty, but then it wasn't further investigated largely. But there was a huge literature on unemployment and poverty, which was the most direct relationship. So I knew that military spending has different categories. And part of the category is on personnel and spending. Things like procurement may crowd out some investment, but personnel, I was a personnel. When I went to the military, there was one less person in poverty. And then the money I could send to my family helped them, you see? So I'm like, the connections, military spending and poverty. The military spending, it doesn't have the impact of social welfare spending, but this part of it, personnel spending, could. So I put that in an article. It's published in 1998, Military Spending and Poverty. Interesting thing about it, I proposed this thesis at Michigan, and I proposed, and I think Kathy Cohen was in that class at one time with Sheldon Danziger and Mary Corcoran, and I proposed it, I put it together, I had my research design, and it gave me I think they gave me an A minus. I said, what's the minus about? Because I would ask my professor. And he said, well, it's never been done. I said, that creates a problem as opposed to it being novel. So this was the kind of stuff you had to deal with. So when I got it published, I went back to find it. I couldn't find him. I could only find Mary Corcoran. So I saw the Journal of Politics published the thesis you said was untenable when I was a student. So I went to test things. This notion that democracies don't fight each other. I thought that was just it was more an empirical regularity that was uncovered. There was no strong theoretical argument for it. So my second book focused on debunking that. I would tell people I'm a professional debunker. I subject thesis to empirical examination. I did the same thing with the Clash of Civilizations thesis, one of the first quantitative articles to demonstrate that its inaccuracy. It was published in 2001. But so I've debunked that. I debunked the democratic peace thesis. I debunked Clash of Civilizations thesis. I tell my students that because I have no originality, I can't come up with my own. So I just debunk the stuff that's out there. But no, I advise them that one of the first things you can do is simply test extant theses with a longer spatial temporal domain. Often when they were published, there's more data now than when they were published. So just test them. And this is a way that you can develop your research skills. And then in my case, to publish in a pretty high-valued journal at that time, the Journal of Politics. But remember, I'm an international relations scholar. So my last book with Zeb Miles, who's the head of the Gordon's War Project, is on religion and world politics. A lot of debunking there too. But we built a data set, had about almost a $2 million grant from the Tilden Foundation. We didn't get all that money. It was scattered across researchers across, I think, 3 continents. But it was published by University of Michigan. A big part of it was challenging, again, the extant thesis about religion and conflict, religion and cooperation. That came out in 2020. I did an empirical work on called African Realism, and this I give credit to both Singer and Ali Mazrui. Professor Mazrui and I were going to write an article. He passed, and he encouraged me so much as a graduate student. Well, Singer foremost, though. So it's a quantitative analysis, but it also includes a chapter on white supremacism and international relations. This may be surprising to some. The first 2 Black political science PhDs, they were called government then, but they're the political science PhDs, was Ralph Bunche, first man and woman, Ralph Bunche and Merce Tate. They both focused on international relations. And so for some, it's like, how did they have a particular penchant for international relations? But there was also at a time where there wasn't as much research on Black politics in the United States, because for some strange reason, Blacks didn't seem to be political. For some strange reason, they didn't vote. And some strange reason, right? So they focused on international relations. And so what I did was I tested the extent to which prominent paradigms in world politics, the 2 prominent, realism and liberalism, were applicable to Africa's interstate wars. So that's that book published in 2015. It was very hard trying to get a publisher. I went down the list. Most of them either wouldn't consider it, because it's where most quantitative scholars in world politics do not focus on racism, much less white supremacism. That's what I call it. And I've been calling it that for, 30 years. And most folks who focus on racism don't do quantitative analysis in world politics. And it's unfortunate too, and that's one thing I would encourage, certainly in Cope's, absent others, a focus on Black scholarship and international relations. When I first got to Michigan, I knew I wanted to do something. I thought I wanted to study the Maghreb because I had taken quite a bit of Arabic. But then I realized I wanted to understand power and I wanted to understand the huge inequalities of world politics. And this was taking me back to, again and again, to war. And again, this is during the Cold War era. So I knew I wanted to do world politics. That's what we call it in Michigan, world politics, not international relations. So I wanted to do world politics. And I wanted to understand quantitative analysis. The idea would be like a carpenter, have the right tool for the right job. And I got upset with folks who would critique quantitative analysis, but they couldn't do it. They didn't know what they were critiquing, you know what I'm saying? And then likewise, I was upset with the quantitative work because substantively, it didn't focus on things that were important to me in the way I thought it was important. So how do you talk about war without talking about white supremacy? See, talk about war and not talk about racism. How you talk about war and not talk about sexism? And I had this other interest as well in interpersonal violence as well. So I published on that too with a former student from the University of Florida, Cruz Carradine Bueno, who's an economist. So I published in Feminist Economics, for example, quantitative work in that regard as well. And this excellent, so I have a lot of folks who encourage me, and a lot of folks their work has been influential. And one of the things I like so much about what I've been able to do over my career, I didn't plan it this way, is I've worked on such different topics. I have 5 books. The first book, the only numbers are page numbers. Then the second book is quantitative. The third book is both. Then I'll tell you a little bit more about the fourth book. The fourth book, only numbers are page numbers. That was in 2019. The last book is heavily quantitative, published in 2020 by Michigan. That book, the 2019 book, that's the book that reflects more of what I was talking about from the projects, my earliest teacher. It's on Black revolution in the United States. It's called The Revolution Will Not Be Theorized. Mm-hmm. The subtitle is, I don't even know my subtitle, I think it's Cultural Revolution in the Black Power Era. But the key there, I ripped off, Gil Scott-Heron, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. But the idea is the revolution will not be theorized by y'all, the darker folks. You leave that to the white folks, the theory. And this will bother me so much. When we talk about social movement stuff, when you talk about storming the barricades or whatever, or the free breakfast program, or freeing the land, you know what I'm saying, with the Republic of New Africa, when you talk about that, black folks are in the forefront. Once you start talking about theorizing it, you got some white person, probably never even been here, from Marx to Gramsci, who's in one of Mussolini's prisons, while Du Bois is writing Black Reconstruction, which is a thesis on Black Revolution in the United States, even if Du Bois don't call it that. So I build on W.E.B. Du Bois, I build on Alain Locke as theorists. I look at the Black Power movement folks as theorists. And it's just something, sister. I would come to some of these folks, because some of them I knew personally, and I would ask them, I'm not a historian. I don't care who was sleeping with who or who. I'm interested in the theory. And it took a while. And some of it you can see how it affected them. And they were like, nobody's asked me that before. When I do with General Baker and Marion Kramer, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, or the old heads from the Black Panther Party, from US organization, from the Republic of New Africa, Mario Badelli, sit with Mario Badelli. Nobody's asked me about the theory. You see what I'm saying? And I think that's what I would encourage. So theory and strategy. And what I saw was they had a theoretical argument. I go back to the slave era, and then I talk about the Black Power movement in terms of the theoretical argument that was right under their feet. I'm not mad at them. I keep saying I'm not mad at them. They're doing a lot of things. You see what I'm saying? But they're trying to mimic, and they take revolutionary theory from abroad. They didn't study the revolution under their feet. What was that? It was the slave revolution of the U.S. Civil War. There was a slave revolution during the U.S., and I don't use that as a metaphor. There was clearly revolt. And I showed them evidence, and I showed from these black scholars, and then I showed Steve Hahn, who had never been black in his life. He's at Princeton, won the Pulitzer Prize for saying pretty much what Du Bois said in 1935. He wins a Pulitzer in 2004. He argues there's a slave revolution. You see what I'm saying? So I said, you won't take it from me. Take it from Steve Holland. Okay, I'm saying Stephanie McCurry in Confederate Reckoning. She says, Davis and others said, my slaves are in revolt. How did they do it? How did they strategize it? What was their strategy? It's beautiful to appreciate, but unfortunately, the civil rights movement, they didn't understand it, but they didn't reflect it, I'm sorry. And it's unfortunate that Black Lives Matter today, there's something about, and Robert Smith talks about, we have no leaders. But one of the problems is they have no theory that applies to Black people in the United States that develops from the actual liberation struggle of Black people, in particular the slave revolution.
So in your view, what is necessary in order to further diversify the discipline and make it more equitable and welcoming to scholars of color in the profession?
That's excellent. Challenge and overturn white supremacy. It's as simple and direct as that. When I'm talking to folks who actually want to address these issues, I say racism in the United States, racism is a management problem in the profession. It's a management problem. Make it plain. There was a time there were no women in political science departments. When they said they're going to have their first woman professor in political science department, picture the department meeting. There's an understanding that once she comes, before she comes, we've got to make some changes. We got to make, if nothing else, we need a new bathroom, a new lavatory, restroom. If nothing else, there are structural changes that have to be made once you address sexism and once you have your first woman professor. I would argue when it comes to having your first Black professor or your first Black tenure professor or your first Black full professor, these issues are not even raised, much less addressed. You see? So what happens when you have your first Black professor? One thing, you have to do something about the evaluative criteria. These white folks often have never had a Black professor, clearly in your department. Many of them also have never had a Black authority figure they had to answer to. You see? How do you weight evaluations for these types of factors, knowing that the context is racist? I'm just talking about with the first, just keep it simple. I'm the first tenured professor in the history of Penn State's political science department. They've been teaching political science at Penn State since the 19th century. I'm brilliant, but I'm not that damn brilliant. No. And it wasn't until, I believe, 2019 that they tenured a sister at all. They still have not tenured a Black full professor, you see? Now, notice what I'm saying, racism management problem. But that professor, tenure professor, is not going to be evaluated by overwhelmingly white professors, watch me now, who've habituated themselves to not having Black professors as peers. And they're going to do the peer evaluations? I'm saying you need to address it. See, notice I'm saying this, you don't have to call the folks racist, I'm saying, but it's a management issue. How do we address it systematically? That was, Earl and I, we go on the links every now and then. We golf. I know it's children. That's not systematic or institutionalized. Because what happens when you have the ones that they don't like her or golf or it's children? You know what I'm saying? That shouldn't be a requirement. What are the institutional? And I argue that those things have not been implemented. And when you have things like the police killing of George Floyd leading to these things, I told them at Penn State, I've been making this argument for 20 years here. You know something? George Floyd wasn't a student here. If what motivates you is not something from your own in your own context, you won't change your context. You'll change the way that public, who's George Floyd's killing affected tremendously. You'll do something for the public, you'll do something for PR. But systematic changes right here. So that's what's key. Also, when you have someone like me who challenges white supremacism, also does quantitative work, how do I get it published? You send it to the editors who've presided over journals, international relations I'm focusing on now, who've never published an article about white supremacism. Ever. You see what I'm saying? But they are going to be the ones to determine if this is scholarship. Just as it's been published. We haven't even gotten to the canon yet. You see? So this is what you challenge white supremacism by challenging white supremacism. If you're talking about race relations, you ain't got it. Just like you challenge patriarchy by challenging patriarchy. You see? Anything else doesn't go to the heart of this. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not knocking other folks who are doing different aspects of this work. I want to be clear. This is just what I've carved out. I want to focus on white supremacism and worldwide, and I got an argument for that. Why? It's the dominant form of racism in the global system. You see? I got an argument for that, why I choose this. I'm not knocking what other folks are doing. Who's going to help to nurture students who are doing this? And there's students who are doing this now because we're taping. I'm not comfortable saying, but maybe for historical. There's a wonderful student at UC San Diego, Bianca Freeman, who's doing work on racism and international relations. This is what is a sister. She's a twin too, so that can be telling her business. But and one of my students, one of the things I'm most proudest of at Penn State, Frank Baumgartner, probably the white person who does more with and for black folks in political science than Frank knows more black folks than I do. He's constantly asking me about these people as prospective hires. He brought us to Penn State. He brought 5 black folks at once. Penn State, it was 2002, but he was the chair of the department. He also went to the same, he went to Michigan. He went to the same high school as I did. He's one of those white folks from that area that actually lives in Detroit, below 8 Mile. 8 Mile is the barrier. This is Frank Baumgartner. He's also brilliant. He's at University of North Carolina. Frank Baumgartner and I want to be careful of my language because we use it like jokingly, and I don't want it to be triggering. But you can probably think of what we mean. We went to all these different conferences, different places, looking. We were looking. And we found 3, I call them the triplets. Kanisha Bond, sister, Jacana Thomas, sister, and Martha Thomas. And I call them the triplets. When I got to Penn State, there were no blacks in the PhD program. That's zero. I asked some of the leadership, both from Michigan, well, why is that? Or what do you think about that? They said, well, but we're making progress. I said, y'all both Michigan trained PhD, as am I. That's not what I infer from zero. Progress. So even what their response is superficial and it's BS. Frank, we went out looking, we brought these 3. 2 of them became our highest placements from Penn State. Not the highest placement of black folk, the highest placements. One of them, Sister Jacana, I call her Queen of Queens. She's from Queens, New York. She's about this big, itty bitty self. Is just exceptional. She went to Michigan State, got early tenure at Michigan State. Now she's out at San Diego, and Bianca Freeman's there. And that's what I say. And I'm not saying they work together, but here's an international relations scholar, and especially Jacana and Kanisha, they went into the security side, where there are even fewer women. There are fewer white women in the security, what we used to call the bombs and rockets, the security side of international relations, which was also exceptional. I tried to get the white chair of the department to put their pictures on. We have pictures on the department to put their pictures on the. She just wouldn't. I talk about this in an article. I wrote in 2019 January. I wrote an article, an op-ed piece for the student paper called "Being Black at Penn State." So I encourage folks to read that, and to read that from a tenured professor who wrote that. And you can write "Being Black" wherever you are. That was the idea. I took it from the students at University of Michigan being black at U of M. So so it talks about this. And I want people to see, because sometimes people say, well, maybe when I get tenure, I can do this. No, you won't. I've done this since I was a student. We led protests during COVID. It's the police killing of Osage in State College. You see, it's right there in State, still leading protests. And so I'm not just talking about what I did back then. And I get this from a sister. She used to tell me in Detroit. She was helping us and working in different movements with us. Downtown Detroit, Kennedy Square. She said, Errol, I never liked what people said. This was in the late 80s, early 90s. She says, Errol, I never liked when people say what they did in their time. She said, until I take my last breath, this is my time. And I would kiss those gorgeous cheeks of hers and say, and long thereafter. Her name was Rosa Parks. You see? So she's working with us. So I'm not listening to people know what they did in their time, okay? Just miss me with all that. But the other part is, when you say you're going to do it when you get tenure, no, you're not. Based on what? You have no experience doing it. Do it, encourage your students, but don't make it a requirement for them learning. your subject, accuracy and not advocacy. But I'm often encouraged that you can do both, and you should do both. So with the university can invest in that. That last thing I said about the activism, I call that, people put that on service, but I also put it on, what do you call it, when people do it for the Defense Department and, what's the word I'm looking for? Consulting. So I'm consulting with a community-based organization. I call that consulting work. You know what I'm saying? So to recognize these different types of work that have been going on for a long time, just like we recognize management issues. And I can leave with this quotidian one that doesn't involve race. We had a department chair, and you'll see why I say this, okay? A department chair who is married, has no children, okay? The department meetings are typically from about 2:30 to 4:30. So those of us with children, like, that's when we're going to pick them up from school. You know what I'm saying? But he has no children. So it's not an automatic response to whereas for us, it's like, whenever we have a department, it can't be during that time. 2:30 to 4, are you serious? For the department? No. So that type of thing. And you don't have to have children, you just have responsibilities associated with when school lets out. So that's, again, this is management issues. How do you do that in the context of racism?
So this is the last question I have. And building off of that, in addition to existing diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, what is your advice to associations like APSA or NCOPS on how best to support Black scholars in the profession as they approach milestones in their career?
And this may seem to be strange coming from me. To invest in Black folks, and especially Black folks who are not doing race. You see, my first published article is of Black nationalism and rap music. I'm not going to make my career on that, but I'm proud of that 1996 article in the journal Black Study. I'm a political scientist. I'm an international relations scholar. Much of my focus has been when I talk about debunking some of these prominent theses. Well, the prominent theses often don't implicate race. They don't mention them. I just said that. What they require is serious a familiarity with the literature, an extensive familiarity with the literature, and first-rate quantitative skills, or better, first-rate empirical skills. It can be surveys, interviews, to encourage that. And then for me, as an international relations scholar, even today, I think that APSA and NCOPS, the focus is not on international relations. That Black scholars, we must be doing like comparative politics or American politics. And I tease my American politics friends because I do world politics. So I tease them and I say, an Americanist is really a comparativist who can only focus on one country at a time. So that's what I tease. At Michigan, we had a picture of world politics and it had a picture of the globe. And underneath, Singer had written, "We focus on one small territory." So I have some of that too. But to invest in Black folks who do a range of this, but also those who do race in places, in places or in spaces that generally don't do it, like international relations, or only do it when it's a quote, Black thing. So you can tell me about the work in Africa or something. So me debunking or challenging the democratic peace thesis, and when I would do it, I would go to the International Studies Association conferences, and and you may have been commented this, sister, I know others have commented, I go to International Studies, they see my badge, and they look at, they're like, Errol Henderson. Like, you're Errol Henderson? And you know what they mean, because in the book, there's no picture of me, it's a quantitative analysis. So they're like, they have questions. And I've had that as a follow-up, like, you're sure? You wrote this one? And I've done this type of work, so I encountered that. So to encourage that in the spirit of, like I said, the two PhDs in political science, African Americans from the United States, or male and female, Ralph Bunche and Merce Tate, they both focus on international relations. So book prizes and things, they often won't focus on international relations. I was upset. There was a Ralph Bunche, something, my African realism book, I think it opens with, I think it was Ali Mazrui, or they got the boys, all the folks all through the international relations. But they don't get no, now you hear my, people call it code switching, I don't know. But there's no Ralph Bunche Prize for me. There's no, and I'm doing stuff that these other folks, they haven't touched. Building on Black folks who have. I've been citing MERS tape since the late early 2000s. And you know, the first time I heard MERS tape, the first person who told me this, as a graduate school from David Singer. I asked him, did he read any black scholars? And he said, and she wrote a book on disarmament in 42 that Morgenthau praised. He told me a bunch and MERS tape. But I didn't know she was the first until I think I was leaving the NCOACH conference. And I bumped into this one sister, and she started telling me that. Her name is Diane Penderhughes. You see what I'm saying? So there's so much of nurturing that can be done, but I think that we're at a space where you can focus on the talent in international relations because, simply put, and my best technical point is, we are the world politics scholar. Okay, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Dr. Henderson. That concludes our interview. This was a wonderful experience. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, I
Thank you.
appreciate it.